evening. Amid the economic crisis and the great banking mess, the biggest face-off is unfolding right now. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman taking on former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan and former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. Nirmala Sitharaman has said that banks had their worst phase under Raghuram Rajan when he was the RBI Governor. She went on to then say that loans were being given, they were available on tap, that at the phone calls of crony leaders, loans were just being given and sanctioned. She went on to blame rampant corruption in the banking sector under UPA era and said that Modi government is left cleaning up the mess that was left behind by the previous government. In fact, there is an interesting quote that I want to specifically highlight. You need to have a country as diverse as India with an effective leadership, or rather too democratic leadership, which probably will have the approval of quite a few liberals. I am afraid left behind such a nasty stink of corruption, which we are cleaning up even today. Now, the finance minister is taking on Raghuram Rajan a day after the former RBI governor spoke at length about government's policies when it comes to economy and especially the banking sector, highlighting some of the bad policy decisions that he believes were taken under the Modi government. Now, while we are not really interested at blame game at this point of time, because India is staring at a whopping 8 lakh crore, just imagine that number, in bad loans. Yet we continue to play hide and seek with infamous fugitives who have looted crores of our money and are now in safe havens. Yet we are looking at more and more scams stumbling out. So rather than blame game, we would want to focus on what has to be done. But of course, one must also ask the question, who is responsible for the India's banking mess? Is the government right in blaming UPA and former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan? That's the big conversation we are having tonight. Let's go across to our panelists and say good evening to Tamal Bandyopadhyay, author and consulting editor with Business Standard. Syed Zafar Islam, spokesperson for the BJP, joins us this evening. Professor Aman Agarwal, Director for Indian Institute of Finance. Dr. Jayanti Ghosh, Professor of Economics at JNU. And Sanjay Jha, spokesperson for the Congress Party. Let me actually begin by going across to Mr. Bandyopadhyay on this issue. Mr. Bandyopadhyay, do you think there is merit in what Nirmala Sitharaman is saying, that before we start fixing it, we should admit the fact that this whole mess is Congress and Raghuram Rajan's fault?
Say, this is a political question and I'm not qualified to answer. And I also can't pinpoint that this whole, because Raghuram Rajan had 3-year tenure between September 2013 and September 2016. So is this 3 years, is the sort of, everything happened during these 3 years? Certainly not. The fact is, Indian banking system was captured by crony capitalism. And that's the story till now, till the Reserve Bank of India, AQR, that is Raghuram Rajan instituted the asset quality review for the first time, where he just told the banks, look, I don't trust you guys. My auditors will go and check your balance sheet. And that happened sometime in August, September 2015. And the banks were supposed to tell the world what's their bad loans by March 2017. So all the muck came up after that. So I saw Raghuram Rajan actually with a broom trying to clean up the system. And on record, he spoke about crony capitalism, and he warned the corporate world that you can't take the banking system for a ride, which you have been doing. He went on record. So I saw that he was trying to clean up the system, and the entire thing that the close to $10 trillion of bad loans that came up in the system only because of his aggressive posture. Having said that, I mean, as I said, it's a political question. Banking system has been in a mess.
Let me rephrase that, Mr. Tamal Bandyopadhyay.
The corporate India was...
From what you've covered, and like you pointed out, if we look at the way India was growing, you know, at a very, very fast pace, say even till 2006, 7, until the global crisis took place. And that kind of changed the narrative and that kind of changed the situation even in our country. If we consider that as the point where things started to turn around, loans started to go bad, banks were still in the zone of where they were restructuring the loans, giving additional loans, giving a longer rope to these companies that were not able to figure out how they want to save their business or grow their business. All of that effectively had hit rock bottom by 2013. That's when Raghuram Rajan took over. So let me rephrase the question and ask you, is it fair to blame Raghuram Rajan as RBI governor when part of this mess, or significant part of it, had already happened?
Yeah, I would largely agree with you. To cut a long story short, between 2006 and 8, Indian economy grew 9% plus, and the credit growth was more than 3 times the GDP growth. So typically, the economists say that 3 times is sort of growth which is tolerable, which the way should be in a growing economy. But we had credit growth more than 3 times, 30% plus credit growth. So I think the seeds were sown at that point of time. We are growing much faster. Banks were giving loan without without discrimination, without proper checks and balances. Public sector bank is a sort of area, as you know, there are lots of issues, including government intervention. So that's how it happened. And then what happened is we have an ultra loose monetary policy. The system was flooded with money, and interest rate came down drastically post Lehman to ward off the Lehman crisis. And people were encouraged to take more and more loan. And that's the seeds where, I mean, when it was the period when everything went, you know, our growth came down below 5% for only 2 quarters. So we told the world, look, we have a stable economy. We are insulated from Lehman crisis. We had nothing to do. But actually, we sowed the seeds again of the problem. And after that, the inflation started rising, and also the bad loans started rising, and the banks were hiding under different restructuring kind of, because that time IBC was not there.
Correct.
Insolvency code was not there. So we did not have the right kind of platform to attack the defaulters. So banks were given leeway by the regulator under different kind of restructuring formula,
right,
and platforms, etc., etc. So we prolonged, and we are in a phase that we are hiding. The banking system was hiding their bad assets. They are not ready to come out. And then the AQR came. So I'm not very sure whether we can pinpoint that these 3 years is the worst phase and everything happened these 3 years. It has been over a period of time it happened.
So let me also point out
that Raghuram Rajan actually was the first governor who...
Yes. Yeah, let me also point out
the first governor who wanted to actually expose the banking system.
Correct. Yeah. Well, technically, if you see the kind of steps that the RBI has taken, the cleanup began during Raghuram Rajan's tenure. He was the one who set up a fraud monitoring cell when he was the Reserve Bank of India's governor. He was the one who wrote to the PMO in April 2015 and said that action must be taken. And here is a list of loans and accounts and companies that you need to look at. He was the one who actually went ahead with the debt recovery tribunal system to say, let's figure out how banks can get some of the money back in absence of the bankruptcy code. So please explain to me, Mr. Zafar Islam, how is it that government is today blaming the ex-RBI governor?
It's not only ex-RBI Governor Mr. Raghuram Rajan, but it is also the former Prime Minister, Mr. Manmohan Singh. The duo has damaged the Indian economy, and particularly the banking sector and overall economy, so badly that it is this government who has actually inherited all the bad loans, all the problems of their bad, all the misdeeds of the duo when we came into power. So we are doing the cleanup exercise. We are actually doing all the work which is now being done. It's basically all the wrongdoings of the Manmohan Singh government and the RBI governor at that point in time. See, let me give a few statistics which I think will definitely help you understand why the Honorable Finance Minister has spoken about it. Since 1947 till 2006, the total outstanding loan of the banking sector was 18 lakh. And from 2016, means 1947 to 2006, it's only 18 lakh outstanding banking loan. From 2006 to 2012, it has rose from 18 lakh to 52 lakh. So it's 3 times. The credit flow, what is credit growth, what you're saying, 30%, that was unprecedented ever in the past in the independence India. Why it was happening? Purely because what the Honorable Finance Minister has clearly articulated and also highlighted in her when she spoke about it, that at that point in time, only these loans were only a phone call away from the high and mighty offices of the Prime Minister or the chairperson of UPA and the then Finance Minister. There are very instances where these loans were sanctioned purely because of the calls made by the then Prime Minister. I will give you one more statistic.
No. So all of that is about crony capitalists,
loans which has been sanctioned,
alleged corrupt leaders, some of whom are in ED custody. One of whom is obviously in ED custody now, has spent a lot of time in jail now. I get that point.
Just a second.
My question was specifically about dragging in the name of the Reserve Bank of India, former governor, because Nirmala Sitharaman, the finance minister, has said when the combination of Singh and Rajan as Prime Minister and Governor of Reserve Bank. So that's literally the period between August, that's literally the period between August 2013 and May 2014. Are you telling me all of the disaster that we are looking at took place between August 2013 and May 2014?
No.
Okay.
You have to see the period when Mr. Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister, and particularly after the economic crisis of 2008, and after 2008. And if you just see all the loans which had been sanctioned and disbursed at that point in time, just take those loans and discount with the discounting rate or the loan rate at that rate which has been sanctioned, and see the EBITDA of those loans. You will see that all this 67% of the project is actually having negative EBITDA. What does that suggest? That suggests if you have professor of finance, ask them if there is a company which is showing EBITDA negative at inception, means this company can never perform because it will only bleed. It cannot even service that debt which the company is taking. I mean 67%, there is a report which is debt curse, which has been during the Rajan and the Prime Minister. They are handiwork, and see that the debt curse report is not being published by us, but is an independent multilateral institution which Credit Suisse has published about India and how the loan was sanctioned, how the credit evaluation process, and how the asset collateral approach is there.
Okay, so let me also highlight. Let me now highlight, Mr. Zafar Islam.
Most of the project was actually not in a position to serve.
In March 2014, the status of non-performing assets, essentially bad loans for the banking system in our country, was about 2.5 lakh crore. It since then has constantly grown bigger and bigger to the point that now it's 8 lakh crore rupees as of March 2019. So obviously the problem has worsened. March 2014 is when it was already very, very visible. By 2015, everybody had raised an alarm. Sanjay Jha, it cannot be denied that during the UPS tenure, a long rope was given to many of these big corporates. Bad business decisions were endorsed with more and more loans. It cannot be ignored that many of political leaders of your party are currently under scanner for their close links with these corporates.
Tanvi, let me answer you without getting into rhetorics. Let's look at hard numbers. You know, when you're talking economics or NPAs, the numbers will tell you the entire story. Number one, in 2014 March, what was the size of the NPAs as a percentage of the gross advances? 3.8%. It was roughly, as you rightly said, 2.60 lakh crores. In March of 2019, that went up to 10.4 lakh crores and 11.2% of the advances. So you're seeing it went up by roughly almost 4 times. To say and attribute all of it to UPA is frankly an absurd charge. Now, let me explain the other point to you.
Why is it
Dr.
absurd?
Raghuram Rajan gave a list to the Prime
These
Minister's
loans
office,
and the
Mr.
decision
Modi's.
to give these companies
I'll come to you.
loans was during your tenure.
I'll counter him.
Why is it an absurd charge?
I'll counter
A
him.
majority of
Tanvi, as
these
I said,
I will
loans
counter
were
it.
bad
Tanvi,
decisions
I'm answering your
during
question.
UPA's tenure.
Since I have to...
Yes,
Tanvi,
Sanjay,
since I have
respond
to-
please.
Tanvi, since I have
Can
to
I
leave at
ask him one?
8:30,
Sanjay
I
Jha.
will appreciate...
1 minute, let him answer
if
my
you
question
give me a
first, Mr.
chance
Zafar
to
Islam.
examine and explain the answer.
Yes.
Because I have hardly got much time.
Yes,
I'm
please do.
leaving in the next
No, no,
5
let
minutes.
him
so
answer.
you
Please
can
explain,
get
please
others to
explain.
speak
How
on
is it
it. So,
absurd?
I think
But
decency
I
demands that
want you to answer one question.
1 minute, please. Can I please listen to Sanjay Jha respond to my question? I don't want to waste time like this back and forth.
Speak
with
without
this.
an interruption?
Sanjay
you
Jha,
at least
please,
answer
Sanjay
my
Jha.
question.
Yeah, can I speak without an interruption? I'm sorry, I'm not able to
At least
speak because somebody is
answer
butting
my
in all the
question
time.
before you leave.
So the simple answer is
Before you run
that
away,
the Prime
please
Minister's office, the Prime Minister's office of Mr. Modi, I mean, this is getting bizarre. I mean, can I speak without an interruption, Tanvi, or do I carry
Listening
on
to you.
right
Go ahead,
away?
please.
I mean, please decide that. The simple answer is the Prime Minister's office was given a list by Mr. Raghuram Rajan, which had the list of the biggest willful defaulters. That means the people who are bigger than Vijay Mallya, Nirav Modi, Mehul Choksi, and Jatin Mehta, who have also, by the way, frauded the system when Narendra Modi has been the Prime Minister. Let's not deny that. I'm answering your question in terms of what you said is an absurd charge. I'll tell you what is absurd. There was a period after the mortgage crisis when the Indian business, it is very normal when your GDP growth is at 9 and 10%, to get into the state of what is very often called as irrational exuberance. Everybody believed that, they could get into these big public-private partnerships,
Correct.
they could create large infrastructure projects, and the return on equity would pay for their debt servicing. That did not happen. But that is not corruption. Corruption is what the RTI has established just around 1 year ago, that the number of fraud cases under Narendra Modi have gone up by 300%. They went up by 3 times, and the frauds in India are at 76,000 crores. That's not a small number. Nirav Modi, Mehul Choksi, Vijay Mallya have all happened under the nose of this
Since
government.
you have to go, and I know
the
Zafar
truth is
Islam wants to
NPAs
ask you a
cannot go up
question.
4 times
Before
if
he
you have
answers,
not
if you can
evergreened
also
them.
answer Zafar Islam's
If you have
question,
not
please.
evergreened them.
Before I
Before
go
he
to our
runs
other two
away, I will ask
experts
for your question.
and get their view
Which
on
is?
it, yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Go ahead, please.
Go ahead.
Zafar Islam.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Mr. Sanjay Jha, before blaming our government, you must tell the
Go
world
ahead.
that how much our government has sanctioned. All these defaulters were given loan during our tenure? Just clarify this. All these defaulters were not given loan during our tenure.
okay,
In fact, given
okay.
your tenure. All this
Okay,
fraudsters.
quick answer.
All
Tanvi,
these
quick
fraudsters.
answer if
So
he
who
is
gave
were given
loans to
loan
Vijay Mallya,
during UPA
Nirav
time.
Modi,
And
Mehul
say,
Choksi,
just a second.
Jatin
Another
Mehta,
question.
and all of the others. Who gave the loans, Sanjay Jha? Who gave the loans?
Another question. Just
No, I don't have time for more
I'll answer
questions.
that.
Let me be the one asking questions,
there,
Mr. Zafar
I want to hear
Islam.
my answer.
Yeah. Yes, Sanjay Jha.
No.
Yeah. So Tanvi, let me answer you in
Okay,
brief.
I'll ask one more
Let me
question.
answer you in brief. When you are in government,
Yeah.
you have a right to stop any account, any corporate account from bleeding further. Evergreening of loans, and the very fact, and I'm telling you this is critical, the Punjab and Maharashtra Cooperative Bank is the appropriate manifestation of the political interference of the BJP. Isn't the HDIL
cannot
director
respond, you cannot
getting
reply.
78% of
These
the loan of the
these
Punjab and
fraudsters
Maharashtra
belong to
Cooperative
your
Bank?
party.
Because the BJP is part of the Maharashtra Cooperative Bank. You are part of the PMC Bank. That is an example before the country. You can't run away from it. And I can tell you, Tanvi, a point
can
which
I
you
just
believe
respond
may
to
not
it?
No,
be
Can I
it
just
realistic.
respond
comes
to-
down to
These are
blame
the guys
game
cannot
between the
respond.
Congress
My
and the
question is one
BJP.
question, he cannot respond.
Let me make it this easier for our viewers to understand. Let me make this easier for our viewers to understand and bring two of our other panelists. Otherwise, this is just going to go around in circles where the Congress blames the BJP and the BJP blames the Congress. Jayati Ghosh, let me come to you on this part. Who gave the loans? When were the loans given? Primarily under UPA's era. When did the people who took these loans and never returned money escape? When did we fail to react on it? Probably during NDA's era. Is Raghuram Rajan then simply being made the scapegoat, even though he was the one who started the cleanup?
Well, first of all, Tadvi, let me just say that I'm really sad. I do believe that the Finance Minister of India should have displayed more gravitas. This is really, there's no point getting so juvenile that, oh, it was your fault, it wasn't our fault, you're the ones who made the problem, nya, nya, nya. This is absurd. The problem is, may I just continue for a minute? The problem is that, yes, during a boom, there is an excess of credit creation, and typically a lot of loans that should not be given get given. In addition to that, there was crony capitalism, which has continued into this regime. A significant part of the NPAs today are loans that have been given since Mr. Modi came to power. So it's not the case that it was only the Congress. It was certainly both governments that have been involved in this. But the problem is something slightly more than that. We are now faced with this enormous system of NPAs, which this government does not seem to be able to resolve. Simply saying, well, it was all inherited almost 6 years, 5.5 years after you have come to power, when in your tenure, the number of NPAs has gone, the amount of the NPAs has gone up, the number of the NPAs has gone up, when the names of fraudsters has been given to you 4 years earlier, you have done nothing about that. You refuse to make them public. You refuse to allow a naming and shaming of them. You do not enable even Parliament to act on this. This suggests that this is a government that is not willing to take the kinds of actions that are required. Now, it's pointless to get into this childish, juvenile thing of pointing fingers at the other party. It's too late for all of that. This is now a government that is in charge at the center, has been in charge for 5.5 years, and is going to be in power for another 4.5 years. They have to actually take a call on what they're going to do about it. What really disturbs me about this entire episode is that the finance minister is not taking her job seriously. She's indulging in this very trivializing kind of activity, which is only meant for TV talk shows. It's not meant for a minister. Okay. A minister has to have more gravitas. A minister has to actually say, we are taking the following actions. A minister has to do these things seriously.
All right, a point well taken. Let me also point out that in his very, very detailed response that Raghuram Rajan submitted to the Parliamentary Estimates Committee on Bank Bad Loans or Bank NPAs in September 2018, he said, yet, unless we determine the unaccounted wealth of bankers, I hesitate to say a significant element was corruption. Rather than attempting to hold bankers responsible for specific loans, I think bank boards and investigative agencies must look for a pattern of bad loans that bank CEOs were responsible for. Some banks went from healthy to critically undercapitalized under a term of a single CEO. They must look for unaccounted assets with that CEO. Only then should there be a presumption that there was corruption. So, Professor Agarwal, are we, rather than looking for solutions and fixing the problem, simply pointing fingers at each other, trying to shrug responsibility? Okay, we can't hear you, Professor Agarwal. I'm just going to fix that audio line with you and come back to you. Let me take that question across to Mr. Tamal Bandyopadhyay. Mr. Bandyopadhyay, do you agree with largely what Jayati Ghosh is also saying, that the focus now needs to be on how to fix it? You know, what Raghuram Rajan started, what he raised the flag for, we're still not able to fix that problem.
No, I think, you know, just give the credit to the current government that they brought the IBC, right? Which is, I mean, the best thing that could have happened. It has its own glitches at the implementation stage. People are going to court and stalling it, so it's not 330 days. It is taking even 660 days for the cases to get resolved and all. But the bankers now are armed with IBC, and the corporate India is no more now taking the banking system for a ride. They are coming back to the table for discussion, and to a large extent, the bad loan recognition part is over. Of course, following the NBFC crisis, we will probably see, not probably, I think we'll definitely see rise again in the bad loan, which was actually going down. So now, yes, we will see a little bit of rise of bad loans because of the NBFC crisis, but the recovery phase is on full steam.
Okay.
So I think we are seeing the results. So we can always quibble around it. The blame game. Who
Right.
is responsible for it? I completely agree with Professor Jayati. That is not the time for blame game. We have to clean up the system. But Raghuram Rajan's AQR started the cleaning up the system, and then we have IBC, Insolvency Code, and bankers are actually, there are quite a few bankers who are arrested and then released. Of course, nothing could be fixed. The so-called corruption was there, the allegations were there, but not a single banker has been punished till now. So we have not been able to fix that thing at all. But then there is a fear, psychosis is coming into this, which has two parts. Yes, it may be it could be a prevention of corruption, but at the same time, bankers are also afraid of taking decisions. So it's a double-edged sword when you go over aggressive against the banker. But there are other issues, there are other problems we need to sort out. Not only this, the entire government ownership, the efficiency, the monitoring, the risk management, the appointment of CEOs, so on and so forth.
Yes,
For
I think
instance,
government
Bank of Baroda,
ownership,
which has taken over 2 more banks and just got merged, now doesn't have any CEO.
correct. Ownership and appointment of the bank chiefs is a very important thing. Mr. Bandyopadhyay, if I can just come back to you on that, but I believe we've got Professor Agarwal back with us. Go ahead, please, Professor Agarwal.
Yeah, Tanvi, you see, leaving this political issue out, important components. You see, Moody came out with a report on the 1st of October where they pointed out and reduced the growth rate to 5.8%. They also came out with the figures that the large amount of the debt which is accumulated in the banks were actually given out between 2009 to 2012. And it was very much evident and prevalent in the banking system, which is there. Two other figures which I like to quote. The NPA issue has been going on for the last 25, 30 years now. And the first bankers report which came out from the Bankers Association of the employees way back in 97, 98, which was put forward before the parliamentarians and the banking community, the media and everybody had listed all the people who had been defaulting from time to time. So it is the people knew about it, the bankers knew about it. I have been crying out for the last 10 years on Lok Sabha television, Rajya Sabha, lots of other televisions that the board and the CEOs need to be asked. Raghuram Rajan talked about it in this second term when this new government came into picture. I have been talking about it for such a long time. If he wanted to correct the system, if he wanted to clean the system, why did he not do it in the first 6 months to a year when he actually joined the Reserve Bank of India? Not that he did not know what is happening in India, not that he was not aware about banking. So it is not a question of blame game here, but we were accumulating toxic assets. And this is after the fact that 2007, 2008, we had the world financial crisis, which was largely a banking originated crisis. And so the banking system should have understood that we had surfaced ourselves as conservative, but we should have taken corrective actions not to give out such loans which could create such havoc. And we are bearing the heat of that havoc. This government, for certain reasons, has been trying, and that's where we have seen certain private banks, chairmen have been questioned, previous MDs have been called back and they have been questioned, there have been other board members questioned. This PMC case would never have got highlighted if they were not in the tune of questioning. You'll be surprised, about 5.5 lakh crores were we waived by the banks, by the government every year till about 2014-15.
Okay, so let me take that point, because so I agree with you, and I think, mostly barring the political representatives, everybody agrees. We don't want to get into a blame game between the BJP and the Congress. I think it's, let's keep that aside. But the fact that an economist and a voice, of the financial sector who's respected worldwide is under attack by the current government is why I wanted to raise this issue. Is he the one responsible for this mess? Was it really the worst period under his governorship? Jayati Ghosh, respond to what Professor Agarwal is saying.
Correct.
If Raghuram Rajan wanted, he could have acted much earlier in his tenure after he took charge. He was a chief economic advisor. He had been working with the government. He was very well aware of the problems.
No, look, I mean, he actually started doing this, I think, 6 months into his tenure. He was actually the one who started the cleanup of the system, and it was an important move, and it was a very difficult move. It was politically also a challenging move. So I think to blame him for the existence of the NPAs and the bad loans is beyond absurd. It's ridiculous. Very clearly, this problem was highlighted, brought to attention, and the first moves to actually get some kind of a resolution began in his tenure. And part of the difficulty, I believe, that he had with the government is that he was trying to clean up more and they were not allowing him to do that. The example of the fraudsters list is, of course, there for everyone to see. We still don't have the publication of that list. We still don't know what actions have been taken. And for all we know, they are still out there frauding the system. But in addition, he wanted to actually move faster, and he did feel frustrated that the current government did not actually allow him to do everything that was required. It's a complicated situation because moving too fast also can destroy the credibility of banks, and it is a difficult line to actually follow. But to blame him for this mess is actually beyond absurd.
Professor Agarwal.
Yeah, I'm sorry to bring it forth again. The important thing is he had a very good line of credit and understanding with the Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. Firstly. Secondly, it is his job to not let further toxic assets get created. If he could not resolve the previous issues, whatever was created, could not bring it to the notice of people, but at least he could have stopped, created systems, structures, and ways to at least further no-go kind of situation to take place, which did not happen. And he did whatever he did. But why did he bring that list out in 15? Why did he not bring it in 14 or 13?
Assets have gone up 3 times.
We haven't managed to do that even now, Professor Agarwal.
Correct, because
yes,
very happy to raise this question because they are being
toxic
look,
assets.
Let me say.
Let me
answer.
Tanvi,
PMC was a good bank. It got an award in 2018.
Okay, Jayati Ghosh, please. Jayati Ghosh first, and then yes.
Look, toxic assets have increased. NPAs have more than tripled in the period of this government's tenure. Are you trying to tell me that this government is so caught up in the past that they have sat there and watched these toxic assets triple over this period and have been unable to do anything? They are so powerless and so unable to do anything. This undemocratic, the finance minister said, we are proud that we have a strong leader. We don't have too much democracy. So in this period of too little democracy, we actually have had a tripling of the NPAs. We have had a massive increase in the number of frauds. We have had a very significant increase in the worsening of the banking situation.
Okay, before I wrap this up very quickly, I want to ask Zafar Islam because, you know, at the end of the day...
blaming Nehru for this.
Yes, at the end of the day, Zafar Islam, you can blame Manmohan Singh, you can blame Raghuram Rajan. Fact of the matter is, now you've been in power for 5 years, you've been given the mandate for 5 more years. The onus is on you to fix the problem. Now tell me, how are we going to do that? Because so far, we've only heard from the government on who's to be blamed.
Then you cannot ignore the truth. The fact that he had enough time before 2014 to actually highlight all these problems in the banking sector.
5 years you've had already.
But he chose not to do that. No, don't laugh. I'll give you some.
Right.
No, just
let's listen to Zafar Islam, please.
Allow me to complete, and then you will get to know what we have done.
Okay.
Just making face, you will not get to know anything. At least listen to people. Don't behave as if you know everything and the other people don't know anything. It's a stupidity.
Okay, go ahead, please. We're listening
Nothing
to you.
else. Let me respond to you. All I'm saying that see, if there's a problem of this magnitude, if you have and if you encounter a problem of this magnitude, you cannot on one fine day declare that the entire banking system is in a mess. The economy will collapse, the country will collapse. Understand the dynamics, understand the situation. By just making a statement doesn't change the situation. So the Honorable Prime Minister and the Finance Minister chose to slowly correct the situation and focus on recovery and not disbursement. Put the system in order, and that's why the proper credit evaluation process was put in motion, and also a separate mechanism to recover money from these defaulters and the corrupt and fraudsters. And that's why all the frauds had happened in the past. It is just reported.
There is the accountabilities of the banking chiefs. Mr. Zafar Islam, if you believe that all of this corruption took place during the UPS tenure or the Raghuram Rajan tenure, where is the accountability? Why aren't you booking these people? How many of these bankers are behind bars right now? You've managed to put a former finance minister behind bars. What about the bank top management, which would have to be in cahoots with these crony capitalists if the system had to get to the place where we are right now? No. So I am simply saying your job doesn't stop at pointing out what went wrong. We would expect the government to go ahead and punish these people. And I agree with you. A lot of this problem started between the 2008 and 2013 period. But that has to be fixed by the current government. Those guilty have to be punished. Half of those guys who took all of this money from our public sector banks have already escaped the country and gone away, and we're still trying to get them back. The others we only realize once it makes it to the national news and a scam is out there in the open. Now, for how long will we continue chasing this rather than actually fixing this and giving us some kind of accountability? I'm completely out of time. I'm going to thank all of our panelists. This was a great conversation with all sides joining in. Fact of the matter is, it just looks like right now that the government is trying to put the blame on somebody who simply came out 2 days ago and spoke about India's economy and spoke about how the government was dealing with the state of India's economy. Raghuram Rajan went on to say there is a need that in such stress situations for the government to come in through the regulator, look through the balance sheet of these companies, figure out which ones can be saved and which ones cannot be, and figure out a way for the ones that cannot be saved to put them in some form of receivership. He also went on to question the government's policy by saying you can't give a stimulus to the entire economy if the sectors that are in crisis continue to block your growth. That policy, he believes, is flawed. He went on to say some of the decisions are going to be arbitrary. Some of them are going to be source of future governments to accuse you of shenanigans and investigate the process and send the CBI after you. But this is governance, and it is about taking hard decisions. You can make it as transparent as you can. So is it because he raised this issue and said the things that he did that he is now being blamed for some issue that is largely a political fault of the previous government, perhaps of the current government? That remains to be seen. Thank you so much for joining us on Conversation 1. We move on to the other big focus. From economy, we shift our focus to the judiciary. And here's a very interesting story. Top court today reserved its orders on the plea to recuse Justice Arun Mishra from hearing matters related to the interpretation of Section 24 of the Land Acquisition Act. Now, as you know, viewers, Land Acquisition Act has been a big story that's gone on for years together. Obviously ended up at the Supreme Court at one point of time. There's been a big courtroom drama that's played out yesterday and today, where a top lawyer, Shyam Devan, who was representing the petitioners, continued to demand that Justice Mishra recuse himself from this bench because his presence could instill bias in the minds of people. Justice Mishra held his ground, and that is what added to this drama. And he asked the lawyer, you argued most fearlessly since yesterday, good quality, then why don't you put in the same into addressing the merits of the case? What is the genesis of this fear? Is it not taking advantage? His question to the petitioners and the top lawyer was, this is an attempt to malign the image of the judiciary. This is an attempt to dent the image of a Supreme Court judge. Justice Mishra was extremely upset, and he called it a social media campaign to dent the image of judiciary because here were a bunch of people who were telling him to recuse himself from a very, very important case. That's the case right now. And my question is very, very simple tonight. Is there a vested interest? Are there vested interests who are looking to target the judiciary, to tarnish the image of the judiciary? Is there merit to what was said today? Let's say good evening to our panelists joining us tonight. In fact, let me very quickly first up go across to Mr. Harish Salve, eminent jurist and top lawyer from the Supreme Court. Mr. Salve, thank you for joining us. I also have Dushyant Dave and Mr. Biswajit Bhattacharya. This is, the best panel we could actually have to look into this issue. Mr. Salve, let me ask you first. What is your own view? Do you agree that there have been attempts, including maybe this one, to tarnish the image of the judiciary?
Well, every time you raise a contentious point doesn't mean you're tarnishing the image of the judiciary. So I get a little concerned when the pitch is raised to saying tarnishing the image of the judiciary. Speaking for myself, I feel the image of the judiciary is tarnished from what goes on outside the courtroom, not inside the courtroom. Inside the courtroom, it is for the judge to regulate his court. And if the judge has allowed an argument to go on, it's obvious that he is not considering it an argument which is not supposed to be advanced in a courtroom. And if the judge is hearing that argument, that means it's an argument within the four corners of the law, within the four corners of the Constitution, and within the four corners of advocacy. So there's no question of tarnishing the image of the judiciary. Whether a particular position is right or wrong is quite another matter. So I don't think this is... yes, social media commenting on why a particular judge is hearing a case, that stands on a completely different footing. So I'm very clear, what goes on outside the courtroom is what you have to be careful of, whether that constitutes tarnishing the image of the judiciary.
All right, let me ask Mr. Dushyant Dave. Mr. Dave, do you believe that, what happened in this specific case, that the fact that there is a plea asking for recusal of a judge is an attempt to tarnish his image? Why can't we just fight the case on the merits?
No, I don't think I agree with Mr. Salve that this is not really tarnishing the image of the institution of the Supreme Court. Every litigant has a right, to say that he is apprehensive about a particular judge because of certain reasons. Now, it can be sometimes, pecuniary bias, it can be many forms of bias, but one of the, biases which has been recognized by the Supreme Court itself is the bias of judicial obstinacy. There is a judgment in 1998, I think, in West Bengal versus Sadanand or something, where the Supreme Court indeed say that there can be judicial obstinacy where bias may take place. Now, here what seems to have happened is that Justice Mishra appears to have taken a particular view, which view perhaps is against the interests of the landholders, the farmers. And he took that view in complete contravention to a judgment of a previous three-judge bench judgment, which was binding on him. So when this matter was placed before the Constitution bench, then it frankly should not have been put before a bench presided by Justice Mishra. But unfortunately, Chief Justice chose to put it before the bench of Justice Mishra. The parties, therefore, the landholders feel that since Justice Mishra has taken a view, therefore he should recuse himself, he should not hear this matter, and the bench should comprise of some other judge presiding the bench. I think the request was not unreasonable. Justice Mishra should not have taken it personally, and I personally feel, and I have seen, I have been at the bar for 42 years, Mr. Salve also has a vast experience, and so has Mr. Bhattacharya. We all know that whenever such a request is made, judges generally, easily agree to recuse themselves. I don't, the fact that, judicial obstinacy is recognized, I feel that there is a personal obstinacy on the part of Justice Arun Mishra to hear this case, which perhaps could have been avoided. And I think, therefore, it has created I would say, a bad taste in the mouth of a lot of people. Ultimately, right to property is a very, very important right people have.
Correct.
And if people feel that their properties are going to be taken away because a certain judgment has been given by Justice Mishra, They have a right. I don't see anything wrong.
No, so I
It's
have
not
to
tarnish the image of the court or tarnish the image of Justice Mishra.
Okay, so I have two more follow-up questions here. And, you know, as a layman, you know, who would wonder at this point of time, because of what you all are saying and what happened in the courtrooms as well, one would assume that judges, irrespective of whether they have a view or not on an issue, would be able to keep aside their personal view and preside on a case. Are we to say that, you know, that may not happen, which is why this issue is being raised? And the second issue is, like Justice Mishra said, almost the entire Constitution bench and the top judges have sat on this case at one point or the other. So are we to then say that all of them should recuse themselves? Mr. Bhattacharya, to these two issues, what would you say?
You see, a lawyer performs a statutory duty fearlessly, without being servile to the court, but with due respect to the court. So if there is a fear of reasonable likelihood of bias creeping in, it is the statutory duty and responsibility of the lawyer to bring it to the notice of the judge. At the same time, a judge performs a constitutional duty, and ultimately the judge has the last word. So I see nothing wrong in a lawyer imploring upon the judge to recuse for a perception of reasonable likelihood of bias. Nobody is suggesting that a particular judge is biased. This is not a factual bias. This is a bias in law. There is a distinction between bias of fact and bias in law. And this is not even an actual bias, reasonable likelihood of bias. So I think that there's this reaction from the honorable judge that judiciary's image is going to be tarnished and all that.
Right.
I think I would respectfully agree with my two senior distinguished colleagues. Nobody is trying to tarnish the image of the judiciary.
Okay.
India's judiciary's image stands tallest. Judges may come, judges may go, lawyers may come, lawyers may go. India's judiciary today commands international respect.
Yes.
A judiciary's image cannot be tarnished just because a litigant, for fear of losing his property, is imploring upon the judge. Ultimately, nobody can compel a judge to recuse. That's not even perhaps the argument advanced.
Yes.
So I am all for balancing a statutory responsibility of the lawyer with the constitutional obligation of the judge to harmonize the two and not make an issue out of it.
Okay.
And I mean, slightly, I have my own views about social media. You know, social media, as long as it is within the bounds of some reasonableness, I think one should basically sort of ignore what is happening in social media.
I would completely agree with you.
To control social
a lot
media
of us journalists would tend to do that. Otherwise, it would become very, very difficult to do a neutral job and, you know, do our job, you know, with full commitment. I think the judges also need to draw the line somewhere when it comes to what social media is saying. But there is a larger issue. This isn't the first time, and I'm sure you will all agree, that a senior Supreme Court judge has actually made a comment like this, has made a comment that there is a campaign to tarnish the image of the judiciary, all to target the judges. It's happened, I think, at least twice this year itself. Mr. Salve, you know, what do you think about that messaging that seems to be coming from the judiciary, that time and again these attempts are being made to attack us?
See, please understand one very important thing, which as a lawyer I must explain to lay people. But I do not see this is my personal view, I do not see this as qualifying as a bias. That's my personal view. The court is going to decide upon it. And let me tell you why. We always recognize that judges come to court with what is called their can't helps. Judges have a particular view in law. For example, in the American appointment system of Supreme Court judges, you always take into account his view on abortion is this, his view on segregation is this, his view on affirmative action is this. So judges come with their can't helps. Judges come with their views in law. And if a judge has a particular view of law, you try to persuade him, and if you can't, you can't. that is never qualified as bias. Secondly, when a larger bench hears a case on a conflict of opinion, it is not hearing an appeal from two benches. Nowhere else in the world does this problem come up because the highest courts always sit what we call en banc. All the judges sit together. Now, if 5 judges decide a case and there are 5 judges in a court and the case has to be reconsidered, 5 of those will sit and reconsider and say, yes, we were right or no, we were wrong. I have seen some of the finest judges who have revisited their judgment and said we were wrong. In fact, one of the authors of this judgment, earlier judgments, Justice Lodha had said,
yes,
he overruled himself, said, I got it wrong in the other case, in one of the arbitration cases. So this happens all the time. I don't consider, speaking for myself, I don't consider this as a bias. But a lawyer telling a judge that, you've taken a view, your judgment is up for consideration, why don't you consider recusing yourself? It's a perfectly legitimate request. The lawyer has made it. I think what Justice Mishra perhaps was alluding to is the kind of criticism which I agree he should have ignored it, but the kind of criticism which surfaced on social media. Now, there the suggestion is not that the judge has a particular view of the law. Some judges view the law pro-property, some judges view property right as being a right antithetical to social justice, so they lean in favor of social justice rather than the right to property. All of us have our can't helps, all of us have our perceptions. And that does influence the way we read statutes, the way we read the Constitution. But a criticism saying a judge is biased means he's going to favor one party, he's going to favor the government, or he's going to favor a citizen, or he's going to decide a case because he knows this is a land acquisition case in which so-and-so has an interest or so-and-so doesn't have an interest. That's a very different kind of allegation of bias, right, whether apprehension or real. So you have to be very clear. The kind of criticism in social media was not of an intellectual bias of the judge, right, who already has taken a view and therefore is likely to stick by his own view. And one last thing I would want to say on this, there are 5 of them on the bench. You are actually saying the other 4 don't matter because none of those other 4 have ever decided this case one way or the other. Why do you go before 5 judges? You go before 5 judges because it is decided by majority. So to say that the other 4 will be completely servile and supine in this, and a judge who has earlier taken a view will reiterate his view, I think is a little less than fair. And I'm only saying so because this is my personal view. The Supreme Court is going to take a call on this. But let's be clear about one thing. There can be no suggestion of any kind of bias which is the kind alluded to on social media that he's going to decide it one way or the other for any particular reason.
All right.
I mean, that's the most unfortunate suggestion, should never have been made.
All right. I am completely out of time, but I really appreciate all 3 of you joining us and sharing your views on this big story, because it's been very interesting in the last 2 days, the way this conversation has played out in the courtroom with the petitioner and the top lawyer there constantly pleading to the judge that you must recuse yourself, which is that you should not sit on this hearing, recuse yourself, withdraw yourself, let another judge come, and the judge insisting that this is an attack on the image of the judiciary and on his image. You heard the lawyer's side. Maybe the eminent lawyers have a different view from what the sitting judges might, but we'll leave it at that for now. Thank you so much for joining us on this interesting conversation.